And now please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, what a joy it is to be here this morning on Confirmation Sunday here at the Hills Church. It's a joy for me, especially because I had the privilege this past year of teaching these wonderful confirmation students every Sunday afternoon and early evening. I have to say, this is one of the highlights of my week, to go there and to see their eager questions, their eager participation, their growing in the faith is something that gave me joy and still does as I stand here today. Also, there's all the pizza, and I have to say that thanks to the parents for all the meals that were served. We very much appreciated that. A huge thanks especially to Mimi D'Angelo, the co-leader for the entire year with me of confirmation, not only this year, but for years past. We're very grateful for your care for the students, your love for the students, Mimi, and your presence every Sunday faithfully. Thank you very much. And also I'd like to thank Anne-Marie Holloway, even though she's not here. Anne-Marie was the one who led confirmation for the first portion of the year before I took over, and so this is very much a result of her hard labors in building up the youth program here at the Hills Church and nurturing these wonderful young people before us today. As we have this confirmation, I can't help but think, of course, of my own confirmation, and you might be thinking of yours. For me, it's easy because my confirmation took place right here at the Hills Church. And in fact, when I'm over at my house right now, I remember taking confirmation classes in my living room with Ann Adams way back in the day. And it was a wonderful confirmation class. We had people like Jamie Ford and Jeremy Banks and Laura Walton and Ben Groppe and Casey Cranker and Liz Sweeting, among many others. And I am proud to have learned at the feet of Anne and with all those great people. One of the things about being a teenager is that it's one of those times where you're first experiencing God in a way that you're conscious of. And as that happens, it's also the time when you start asking questions about God for the first time. Does God exist? How do we know? What do we do with the Bible? For me, I read the Bible for myself when I was in 7th grade, and I remember how profoundly impactful that was for me, but at the same time, it left me with lots of questions. What do you do with this text or that text? How do you deal with the miracles of Jesus? There are questions about God's justice. Why do bad things happen to good people? All of these questions are questions that when you get to be a teenager are finally being asked for the first time. And confirmation is that opportunity for the kids to ask those questions, to have them answered. And even if they aren't satisfied with the answers right now, they know that there are answers for them somewhere in the future. It's a crucial moment on the journey of faith. But this morning, I really want to focus on the confirmands, and particularly on what this wonderful story that Raleigh just read from 1 Samuel has to say to them. Here's a story where Samuel is a boy. If you remember, Samuel was the late-born child of Hannah, and he was dedicated in service to the temple in thanksgiving for his birth. And so here's Samuel as, in this text, I'd like to think of Samuel as, I don't know, a 14-year-old, confirmation age, sitting there in the temple and having God speak to him. So the first thing, confirmands, I want you to know is that even though society might think that you're too young for this, that, or the other thing, according to the scriptures, when God wanted to reveal God's self, he did not speak to Eli. He spoke to people like your age. You are at an age where you can experience God for yourselves and continue to nurture that experience. So the first thing I want to say to you on this morning is to be open to that experience. We talked about it a lot during confirmation this year, about how people across different cultures and all different ages have attested to an experience of the divine. People have talked about it as an experience of awe. Some people talk about it as the experience of the numinous. It's something that's ineffable, oftentimes cannot be put into words. There's a sense of the sublime that comes upon you in the experience of God. Other theologians have talked about it as the feeling of absolute dependence. However you want to describe that feeling, the more that you are open to it, the more you can recognize it. Because that's another thing in this text. You see, Samuel initially doesn't recognize the call of God. It's something that he has to be awakened to in the course of his life. And so the same thing is true with you. I invite you in your life, starting now, to try and open yourself up to God's presence. For me, one of the things that I like to do is everywhere I've gone, I've always had a sacred space I can go where I can have a reset with God. For me, there's a tree in the backyard of the parsonage where I will sit on the porch and look at that tree. And when I need to commune with God, that is the place I go. When I was in Houston, and in my front yard, I had a little area where I would sit, and likewise, I would commune with God in that space. I'm sure many of you have spaces you go when you want to commune with God. Perhaps it's even here in the sanctuary when it's all empty and you can come and pray. But I want to make sure that the confirmands, that you have some space where you can go and find the presence of God. And remind yourself of that. Maybe it's someplace at school. Maybe it's someplace at home. Maybe it's out on a walk somewhere. Some place where it's just you and God and you can reset yourself in the midst of the things going on in your life. So that's the first thing I want you to think about, is this sense of God, opening yourself up to that experience. Second thing here, this is an important one. At the end of this text, Samuel says to the Lord, "Speak, for your servant is listening." Second thing I want to say is that to believe in God has content to it. So again, in society, you have to make a decision whether or not you believe God exists. Philosophers of religion who spend their entire lives studying this, who have PhDs in this, who teach it at major research universities, philosophers of religion will say there are arguments for and against God on both sides. Regardless of what Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins or others might say, the people who actually study this as philosophers will say that there are valid arguments on both sides for and against the existence of God. At a certain point, you have to make a decision to believe that God exists based on your experiences of life. Either the world is a random collocation of atoms, either something like consciousness is just an illusion. In fact, we're just at the whims of whatever interactions are going on that are outside our control, or there is a loving creator, a loving presence that is there in the world and shaping your lives. You have to make that decision at some point. Either God exists or God does not. And if God does exist, it carries with it certain demands on your life. So if God exists, God demands to be worshiped. God wants to be given praise to. When something amazing happens in your life, you can sit down and say thank you to God. There is that call, and there's that call for a response from each and every one of us. There's a sense of humility when you believe in God, because you realize that you're just one of many things. You are not God. There's such a tendency in our culture to elevate ourselves to being on the same level as God. Certain folks in society will do that all the time. But for someone who has an earnest belief in God, it puts you in your own place. It also is one of these things that reminds you that everyone is equal before God. Society is one of these places where we constantly put people on pedestals, whether they be athletes or politicians or billionaires, you name it. To believe in God is to say that everyone is a child of God and everyone should be treated as such, regardless of whether someone is homeless on the streets, someone is disabled, someone is going through hard times, or someone is the wealthiest person in the world. According to God, they are all on the same level. If you believe in God, you also have there's a demand placed on you to serve others and to serve those in need. To whom much has been given, of them shall much be required. If you believe in God, there's a demand to give yourself grace and to give others grace, because we're flawed human beings. If you believe in God, you can sit back and say with confidence, hey, I know that I'm going to die. The big legacy that I'm going to have is the impact I'm going to have on those around me. That is going to be my legacy. Those are the values of God. To love those around you, to love those in community with you. So that's the second thing I'll say. One, keep your minds open to God, just like Samuel did in the temple. The second is Samuel said, speak, God, for I am listening, and there is content here. If you believe in God, there are certain demands on your life as a result of it. And the third thing I'd say is this, is that the text is this great moment where it says that the word of the Lord was rare in those days, and visions were not widespread. So in this passage in 1 Samuel, things are not great, and yet God chooses to reach out to a youth in order to find the solution. You all are the future. You are the people who will lead this country, this community, wherever life takes you, into the generations ahead. Those around us have left you the world that we have, and you have to deal with it. And I have great hope for you. And I have to say, one thing that will give you hope as you face that future is having a belief in God. The English writer G.K. Chesterton, in his book Orthodoxy, has this great thing where he said, Chesterton is basically like how boring it is to be an atheist, where everything is just limited and everything is predetermined. Why would I want to live in that kind of world? I want to live in a world where there is the majesty of God that could break in at any moment, where there could be new joy and new love around every corner, where creativity is springing forth. I want to be wide open to the future and the possibilities that lay before me. So I say that same thing to you all. So those are the three things I want you to take with you on this day. 1, be open to the experiences of God. 2, remember that if you believe in God, it has actual demands on your life. And the third thing is be hopeful, because with the presence of God, there are great things that lie ahead. And the last thing I'm going to say, just in conclusion, is that this community here at the Hills Church will always be here for you. No matter where you go and what you do, you can always come back here and you will find a home. Maybe you'll come back here because you want to get married in this sanctuary. I think that would be lovely. Maybe you'll come back here with your own family someday to raise them in this church. Maybe you'll be going through difficult times, or maybe you just want to come by and say hi. Whatever it is, the doors here are always open. My door is always open, and I know the folks here are here to support you. So congratulations on the day of your confirmation. And now it's time to welcome you into the Christian faith. But before we do that, we should rise and sing our next hymn.